Here's a chilling statistic. The Social Security Administration has identified over $500 million of underpayments in 2019. That's up from approximately $300 million in 2017 and $400 million in 2018. When COVID hit, they stopped keeping track. At least we can't find data beyond that point, but we can assume that it keeps going up from that point forward. But if you look at it the other way, there is a source available. That's the Inspector General, and they've identified that the SSA has paid over $23 billion more than they should have paid in 2023. We'll discuss why Frank Bisignano, the new head of Social Security, might just be the person to fix all of this in a moment, but let's talk about two other points. The first is that you, as someone who's watching this video, are of a particular type of class of people that spends a lot of time thinking about your finances, if you're our average demographic, which my guess is you probably are, and that you wouldn't be the recipient of an overpayment of Social Security, because if you were, well, you'd probably report it knowing that it was going to come back at you at some point. The second is the invisible elephant in the room, and that is the underpayment data. The SSA doesn't actually have the correct underpayment data because there is a lot of data that's missing from its records from in the past, including records that might involve you, to be completely frank. Late-stage Gen Xers and baby boomers were in the workforce when the SSA was developing its master beneficiary record. This was the record that they used when they were converting all of their data from effectively paper and files onto a digital platform, and that went from the late 70s all the way through the 90s and beyond. The conversion was plagued by inaccuracies and problems. They were taking 40 years of data that was all paper and moving it into a digital platform. A lot of this resulted in unresolved work history information for many people even today. That could involve you, by the way. More importantly, today's SSA is using technology from the early 2000s, which means that it's more prone to mistakes and costly errors. Now, that information is interesting, but why is it useful here? Well, Frank Bisignano was the CEO of First Data from 2013 to 2019, and in 2019, First Data merged with Fiserv, and he's been the CEO of the combined entity ever since. So what does Fiserv do? Payment processing. In particular, it does payment processing for banks and other financial services businesses. Banks can't just show up and say, we're missing $500 million in payments, we'll figure it out later, because number one, they'll lose their license, but number two, their shareholders will throw out the CEO. And so as a consequence, private industry has developed technology that would be really, really useful for the Social Security Administration. And Fiserv has over 16,000 company clients worldwide, and very importantly, they have various entities of the government as clients as well. Fiserv has prepaid card programs to distribute efficiently government benefits, and they work with federal, state, and local government on tax filings and with Authenticare for home health care payments. Now, I'm sure that people could find problems with each one of these entities to varying degrees, but the reality is a private company like Fiserv, which has 16,000 clients and is in the payment processing business, has the technology and the intelligence to make sure that payments get to where they're supposed to go and not where they're not supposed to go. And for those of you who don't know my background, I worked in financial services for over 25 years. In fact, I got my start at Deutsche Bank back in 1999. And there are a lot of things that drive performance at banks like Deutsche Bank, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, and others. But the one thing that they have to get right in order to keep clients and not lose money is payment processing. If not, there's a tremendous amount of rework, lost customers, and potentially a lot of money lost. So what does Frank Bisignano bring to the table? Well, first, he has experience in high volume, high value, very rapid transactions, interest in principal payments and repayments on things like mortgages, corporate loans, and other lending product need a high degree of accuracy because, as I said, if they get it wrong, people lose money. As a consequence, in these organizations and in most banks, frankly, they have people that are well trained and they have systems that do exactly what they need to do when they're supposed to do them. And the traditional measure of success or failure of a company is its stock price. The Fiserv stock price has gone from $35 a share to $205 a share in the last decade. That's a 19% return on equity. For reference, the S&P 500 has gone up about 11.5% during the same period of time. By the way, if they can get it right, that saves the SSA tens of billions of dollars a year in overpayments, and that doesn't even include the efficiencies that they can get by automating staff and having a lower cost of personnel. Currently, the Social Security Administration has over 60,000 employees. For reference, banks like PNC and Truist each have somewhere between 50 and 60,000. Now, after ensuring accurate payments, next is improving the customer experience. After all, the customer is the recipient of Social Security, the one who paid into Social Security for 30 or 40 years. So making sure that automation occurs at the right place and the right time, and manual intervention when it's not the right place or the right time is supremely important here. And setting up the system for things like AI, and when there is human-to-human contact needed, that the interaction is consistent throughout the SSA. And frankly, giving the staff the ability to fix problems instead of referring those problems onto a supervisor or a supervisor's supervisor will save a lot of time and money, and also setting up a consistent approach when mistakes do happen to get them resolved quickly. Now, I will say that this is an ideological outcome, and what could happen, what may be completely different, and there's one fundamental reason for this. The reason is that even in the private sector, retraining takes time, and the ideology of a particular company and its direction can be really disturbed, even if a handful of people have water cooler chats that don't end up in the boardroom or in the meeting room. Employees need to buy into it or they won't support it, and even if they do support it, the culture has been in place for a very long time. It takes a lot to change culture, even in private industry. There are, of course, examples of rapid culture change, but they usually happen when there's an emergency or a shock to the system, which might happen here, to be completely frank. But as hard as changing culture is in the private sector, it's much harder in the public sector simply because of lower turnover. According to MoneyZine, the private sector had turnover of 48% in 2023, and the public sector had 19.2% turnover. More importantly, involuntary turnover in the private sector was 14.4%, and in the public sector was 4.8%, which means that job security is running really high in the public sector. People in the public sector tend to get paid less. It's not always the case, of course, but as a general rule, you can assume that if you had two jobs, one in the private sector and one in the public sector, the one in the private sector would pay at least a bit more. But what those in the public sector have are job security, they have defined pensions, and they have benefits that don't exist in the private sector. So all in all, I think it's right to be cautiously optimistic about Frank Bisignano. He brings a lot of really good experience to the SSA, but of course, only time will tell. If you like this video, check out that video, 8 ways you can lose your Social Security, some of them instantly. This is Jeff Schmidt, and I will see you in that video right there.
Holy Schmidt!